The scent of decay could never mask the fragrance of memory. The morning air in Queens carried a sharp chill, the kind that seeps through wool coats and into the bones. Clara Bennett tightened her scarf as the phone pressed against her ear. "Ms. Bennett, they've started the demolition. I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." For a second, she couldn't breathe. Her father's voice, long gone, echoed in her mind. "History isn't meant to be polished, Clara, it's meant to be remembered." By the time she reached the old district, the street she'd once walked as a child was almost unrecognizable. The smell of dust and rust hung heavy in the air. Machines roared, tearing through the brick walls of what used to be the Willow Avenue Library, her father's last restoration project before he died. She ran past the yellow barricades, ignoring the workers' shouts. "Hey, you can't be here." But she stopped only when she saw him. Daniel Carter stood at the center of the chaos, black coat, hard hat in hand, giving orders with his usual calm precision. The same voice that used to whisper in her ear now sounded like a verdict. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. For a brief moment, the world went silent. "Clara," he said, her name sounding foreign in his mouth. Her heart clenched. "You're the one leading this." He looked at the ruins behind her. "I'm overseeing a redevelopment project. It's nothing personal, nothing personal." Her voice cracked. "You're demolishing what's left of my father's life's work." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if counting before replying. "Your father built beautiful things, but they belong to another time. Queens needs progress, not nostalgia." She laughed bitterly. "Progress? You mean profit?" The workers glanced between them, sensing the tension. Daniel's tone softened almost imperceptibly. "You shouldn't be here, Clara. It's not safe. Neither was being married to you," she whispered. Then she turned and walked toward the remnants of the library, her boots crunching over glass and debris. He watched her kneel beside a fragment of stained glass, the one her father had installed decades ago. Sunlight pierced through it, scattering faint colors onto her hands. The same hands that once designed buildings beside him, that once touched his face before everything crumbled. For the first time in years, Daniel hesitated. He could have ordered her out. He could have looked away. But something about the sight, Clara standing among the ruins, holding onto a shard of memory, struck a place in him he thought long dead. When she finally stood and faced him, there was no fear, only quiet defiance. "This isn't over," she said. "You can destroy these walls, Daniel, but you can't erase what they meant." He didn't answer. The bulldozers halted on his silent signal just for a moment before the engines roared again. As Clara walked away, the wind carried the scent of dust and aged wood, and beneath it, faintly, stubbornly, the lingering fragrance of memory. 5 years earlier, the world had felt brighter, or maybe Clara had just been too young to notice the shadows. She was 27, fresh out of graduate school, and armed with idealism sharp enough to cut through concrete. Her dream was simple: preserve beauty before it vanished. That was the year she met Daniel Carter. He walked into the city's urban renewal summit like he owned the place, and, in some ways, he did. The Carter Group had just acquired half of Brooklyn's waterfront for a series of luxury developments. When he stopped by her small exhibit of restoration sketches, she expected polite disinterest. Instead, he lingered. "You really think these old facades are worth saving?" he'd asked, studying her design of the Willow Avenue Library. "They survived wars and storms," she replied. "That makes them worth more than anything new." He smiled, intrigued. "You talk like history is alive." "It is," she said. "You just have to listen." That night, they talked for hours about architecture, legacy, and how cities could breathe if people stopped suffocating them with glass towers. He promised her, "We'll build something different, something lasting." For a while, he kept that promise. They married a year later, a small ceremony at a church near the Hudson, her father beaming as he walked her down the aisle. Daniel had been attentive, driven, affectionate, in his own quiet way. When he looked at her, she saw not the ruthless investor the papers described, but the man who believed in vision and partnership. But power has a way of shifting the ground beneath love. Success came quickly. Daniel's projects doubled, then tripled. His office lights burned through the night. Dinners turned into voicemails. And every new skyscraper he built seemed to cast a longer shadow over what they once dreamed together. When Clara proposed restoring the old Queens district, her father's lifelong project, Daniel hesitated. "It's sentimental, Clara," he said one evening, staring at the blueprints. "There's no return on something like this." "It's not about return," she argued. "It's about remembering." He sighed. "That's the difference between us. You see memory, I see momentum." Her father fell ill shortly after. Clara begged Daniel to fund the restoration in his name. He refused, not cruelly, but coldly. "I can't mix business with emotion, you know that." The day her father died, she found Daniel in a meeting, laughing with investors. She didn't interrupt. She just stood outside the glass wall, realizing the truth. The man she loved no longer believed in anything she did. A week later, she left him. No screaming, no scene. Just a note on the marble kitchen counter. "You build towers, Daniel. I build homes, and I can't live in yours anymore." He never called. She never looked back until now, and as the memory faded into the cold present with dust, machines, and the echo of her father's dream crumbling, Clara finally understood. The price of love had always been too high when paid in compromise. The air in Queens smelled of dust and gasoline. Clara stood across from Daniel, the ruins of the old district stretching behind her like a battlefield. "So this is what progress looks like to you," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor underneath. Daniel didn't flinch. In a crisp charcoal suit, he looked every bit the man the business world worshipped. Composed, unreadable. "Progress looks like opportunity, Clara. This neighborhood's been dying for years." "It's not dying," she shot back. "It's neglected. There's a difference." He exhaled, tired. "You always did know how to make decay sound poetic." The sting of his words hit, but she didn't retreat. "And you always knew how to make destruction sound reasonable." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, thick with years of what was never said. Then, Daniel's tone softened, barely. "Why are you really here?" "Because my father's work deserves better than this." That was when he paused, the only sign that she'd struck something beneath his armor. When the city had announced the redevelopment project, Clara hadn't planned to interfere, not until she saw the list of demolition sites, and the address she knew by heart, 42 Willow Street, her father's old restoration workshop. Now, she faced the man who once promised to build a future with her, standing ready to erase the past she cherished most. Daniel crossed his arms. "You want me to stop the project? I want you to see what you're destroying." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "Fine, you have 30 days. Clara blinked. 30 days for what? "To prove it's worth saving. Show me something that outweighs the profit. The logistics, the politics. Convince me this," he gestured to the cracked brick walls, "isn't just sentiment dressed as principle, and if I fail," his gaze hardened, "then I'll finish what I started." It wasn't a challenge, it was a verdict. But Clara had learned to fight battles on impossible ground. "Then I guess I'd better get to work." The corner of his mouth twitched, a trace of admiration, or maybe regret. "You haven't changed." She smiled faintly. "Neither have you. That's the problem." That night she returned to her small apartment filled with rolled blueprints and dust-covered sketches. The city lights outside flickered like dying embers. She opened her laptop and began drafting proposals, contacting preservation groups, architects, journalists, anyone who might care. On her desk, a framed photograph of her father and Daniel at the ribbon cutting of their first restoration project together stared back at her. She turned it face down. Across town, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the same blueprints she once loved. For the first time in years, the silence of success felt suffocating. 30 days, 2 hearts, and a city caught between remembering and forgetting. The war for Queens had begun. The next week turned into a storm. Clara worked like she hadn't slept in years, organizing petitions, filming documentaries, calling every reporter who would listen. Within days, #SaveOldQueens began trending across social media. Standing in front of the crumbling brick facade of Willow Street, she faced a crowd of volunteers and said, "We can't rebuild the soul of a city once it's gone. So we protect it, piece by piece." The cameras loved her. The people did, too. Across town, in the glass tower of Carter Holdings, Daniel watched the footage on mute. "She's turning this into a circus," one executive muttered. "No," Daniel replied quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. "She's turning it into a movement." He turned off the monitor, frustration rising like heat. It wasn't supposed to go this far. He'd given her 30 days to fail, not to make him doubt everything he'd built. Within 2 weeks, investors began calling. Public sentiments shifting. One said nervously, "We can't afford a PR nightmare." Another warned, "You'll look like the man who bulldozed a legacy." Daniel clenched his jaw. For the first time, money wasn't fixing the problem. That evening, he drove to Queens. The site was bathed in the golden light of sunset, and there she was, kneeling beside a cracked foundation stone, tracing her father's initials engraved faintly in the concrete. He almost turned back, but something rooted him there. "You're not supposed to be here," she said without looking up. "I could say the same," he replied, his voice softer than she remembered. Clara stood, brushing dust from her hands. "You came to see what defiance looks like." "I came to see what's left," he said. "And maybe, what I missed." She faced him fully then, eyes steady. "You missed the point, Daniel. It was never about the buildings. It was about the people who built them, who believed something could last." Her words landed heavier than he wanted to admit. For a second, his composure cracked. He nodded toward the old workshop. "Your father believed in that once. I respected him. You destroyed everything he built." His voice lowered. "You think I don't know that?" For the first time since they'd met again, Daniel looked small, not powerful, not untouchable, just human. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed. Another news alert. Donations were pouring in. The preservation fund had reached its first major goal. She smiled, not at him, but at the message. "Looks like people care more than you thought." Daniel turned to leave, his expression unreadable. "You might actually win this." "I'm not doing this to win," she said. "I'm doing it because I still remember what it's like to believe in something worth saving." He paused, then murmured almost to himself, "Maybe that's what I forgot." As he walked away, the light of the setting sun broke through the dust, casting their shadows side by side across the cracked pavement. 2 lives fractured, but still connected by what refused to crumble. 3 months later, winter settled over New York like a gray shroud. The old district of Queens was quieter now, No more protests, no more cameras. Clara walked through it every morning, breathing in the scent of brick dust and rain. The restoration fund had grown, and the project was finally underway. But on the 52nd floor of Carter Holdings, a different storm brewed. Share prices are slipping, a board member warned. Investors are losing patience. Daniel sat at the head of the table, silent, eyes fixed on the skyline. He'd poured millions into stabilizing the company's reputation and lost nearly as much. Beside him stood Evan Brooks, his seconding, sharp suit, sharper smile, once a street kid who sold scrap metal to survive. Evan had clawed his way up through charm, ruthlessness, and an uncanny instinct for opportunity. Now, opportunity stood right in front of him, and it looked like Daniel Carter's crumbling empire. After the meeting, Evan walked into Daniel's office uninvited. You know, people are nervous, he said, feigning sympathy. The board's wondering if your emotional distractions are clouding your decisions. Daniel didn't look up. You mean Clara Bennett? Evan's smile didn't waver. I mean, maybe it's time for fresh leadership. Someone who still remembers how to separate business from sentiment? Daniel finally met his gaze. And I suppose that someone is you. Evan chuckled softly. If it keeps this company alive, maybe. That night, Evan made his move. He leaked an internal report suggesting Daniel's financial mismanagement had endangered shareholder interests. Anonymous articles surfaced online whispering about Carter's collapse, romantic scandal, and corporate negligence. Within a week, public confidence plummeted. Clara first saw the news while drafting blueprints at her desk. The headline burned across the screen. Carter Holdings under investigation, CEO linked to preservation scandal. Her phone buzzed. Evan's name appeared. Clara, he said, voice smooth as glass. I thought you should know. Daniel's trouble isn't just his doing. The board's ready to replace him, but I can stop it if you help me. She frowned. Help you? Help? Give a statement? Tell them he forced your preservation project for personal reasons. It'll end his influence and protect your work. She hesitated. You want me to betray him? Evan's tone softened. He betrayed you first, remember? He always puts himself first. You deserve better, Clara. You deserve someone who actually sees you. The words hung in the air, cold and calculated. She ended the call without replying. Later that night, Clara sat in her studio, staring at the half-finished model of the old street. For a brief moment, she wondered if Evan was right. Daniel had destroyed her once, and yet, when she closed her eyes, all she saw was his face under the dying light, whispering, maybe that's what I forgot. Across town, Evan stood by the window of his penthouse, phone in hand. Watching the city that had once spat him out now glitter beneath his feet, his reflection stared back a boy who once had nothing, now inches from having everything. He smiled thinly. By the time Daniel realizes, it'll all be mine, the company, the legacy, even her. But somewhere deep down, even he knew, love built on conquest always ends in ruin. The winter wind howled through the empty streets of Queens, rattling the scaffolds and loose sheets of tin. Clara locked the studio late that night, the cold biting through her coat. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Still walking home alone. Clara. Her blood ran cold. It was Evan. His voice dripped with amusement. You shouldn't stay out so late. The city isn't safe for people who stand in the way of progress. Is that a threat? She demanded. No, he replied smoothly. A reminder. Withdraw your campaign against Carter Holdings. Sign the release form, and everything stays intact. The line went dead. Her hands trembled. Evan wasn't bluffing. She'd seen what he was capable of when he wanted something. And now, he wanted everything. That night, she wasn't the only one unable to sleep. Across town, Daniel sat in the shadows of his old penthouse. No guards, no phone calls, no empire left. Just silence and regret. He'd lost the company, the board, and the only person who ever made him believe redemption was possible, until he saw the message on his screen. From Evan Brooks, your little architect has been asking too many questions. Maybe she needs a reminder of how fragile dreams can be. Daniel was out the door before the message finished loading. Hours later, Clara stood in her studio trying to gather courage to call the police. When the door burst open, Daniel appeared, drenched in rain, eyes wild. Pack your things, he said. Now. WHAT, Daniel. What's happening? It's Evan. He's crossed the line. Before she could react, headlights flared through the windows. Two black SUVs stopped outside. Clara's pulse spiked. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They slipped out through the alley as Evan's men entered. From the shadows, he watched them run, fury burning in his eyes, still playing the hero. Daniel, he muttered, let's see how long that lasts. They hid in an abandoned warehouse by the river. The air smelled of rust and sea salt. Clara finally turned to face him. Why are you here? Daniel took a deep breath. Because I never meant to destroy what your father built. She stared. What are you talking about? The day I bought the old district, he said quietly, the other developers were circling like vultures. They would have wiped it out in weeks. I thought if I owned it, I could keep it safe at least until you were ready to take it back. Her eyes widened. So you? I lied, he admitted, because I was afraid that telling you would mean facing everything I'd done wrong. I let my pride bury the truth. Before she could speak, a noise echoed footsteps. Evan's voice followed, cold and furious. You always ruin everything, don't you, Daniel? He stepped into the light, gun in hand. I built myself from nothing. I starved, I begged, I clawed for every piece of power, and you both still looked down on me. Evan, please, Clara said softly. This isn't you. He laughed bitterly. That's where you're wrong. This is exactly who I am. But before he could move closer, sirens wailed in the distance. The police lights flared outside, red, blue, and white slashing across the walls. Daniel stepped forward, shielding Clara. It's over. Evan froze. His mask cracked for the first time, desperation replacing anger. Then he dropped the gun and whispered, You were supposed to see me. As the officers took him away, Clara turned to Daniel, tears glinting in her eyes. So, what happens now? Daniel exhaled, a faint, tired smile crossing his face. Now, we rebuild. Not the company, something better. Spring came quietly to Queens. The air carried the faint scent of rain and fresh paint, mingling with the echo of hammers and laughter. For the first time in years, the old district was alive again. The faded walls that once bore cracks and dust now gleamed under soft morning light. Signs of small shops reappeared. A bakery, a gallery, a bookstore named the Memory House. Clara stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, eyes shining with both exhaustion and pride. Behind her, footsteps sounded. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was, still micromanaging every brick. I see, Daniel said, his tone lighter than she remembered. She smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. He stepped beside her, his gaze sweeping over the restored street, the same one he'd once nearly destroyed. It's beautiful, he said softly. Your father would have been proud. Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Our father would have said, Don't just rebuild the walls. Rebuild the people who live inside them. They stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the new city around them. After the night Evan was arrested, the world had moved on fast, faster than either of them expected. Daniel's company had collapsed, investors fled, projects frozen, yet out of the wreckage came something unexpected: freedom. He'd sold his remaining assets, cleared his name in court, and used the settlement money to start again. This time, with Clara, their new venture, Legacy Developments, wasn't about profit margins or skyscrapers. It was about preservation, rebuilding spaces without erasing the souls within them. Weeks later, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, press and officials gathered as the restored district was officially reopened. Banners fluttered in the breeze. Clara, dressed simply but elegantly, took the stage. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying both conviction and warmth. This project began with ruins both in brick and in heart. But sometimes, destruction is just the universe's way of making space for something new. What you see here today isn't just architecture, it's forgiveness, persistence, and memory, built not from perfection, but from the courage to start over. Applause filled the air. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel walked toward her, a small smile on his lips. You forgot one thing, he said. What's that? She asked, turning to him. That every foundation needs trust, and I almost lost mine. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Almost, she echoed. He extended his hand, half teasing, half sincere. So, partner, what's next? She slipped her hand into his. Whatever we build it right this time. They walked together down the cobblestone path, where the sound of their footsteps blended with laughter, the rustle of new leaves, and the distant chime of the church bell. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel and Clara stood on the rooftop of the newly restored bakery. The skyline shimmered, old brick meeting new glass, past meeting present. Clara turned to him. Do you ever think we could have done it differently? Daniel shook his head. If we had, maybe we wouldn't have learned how to rebuild. She smiled, leaning into him as the wind stirred her hair. Even decay, she whispered, can bloom into memory again. Daniel's voice was low, steady, certain. Only if someone dares to remember.